In the untamed heart of the Wild West, where dust chokes the trails and hope flickers like a dying ember, a lonely rancher named Elias stumbles upon a miracle he never dared dream of. A young woman, Clara, sold by her own relatives, carries with her not only a child, but also a chance at redemption. Through silent nights, whispered judgments, and a fire that threatens to burn everything, their story weaves a tapestry of courage, grace, and a love stubborn enough to thrive in the harshest of lands. Brace yourself, my friend. This is no tame tale. Follow us to the end, feel the pulse of the frontier, and find out if a broken man and a betrayed girl can heal each other's wounds. Subscribe to the channel, like, and comment on what you thought of this story. Don't forget to hit the bell to be notified of new videos, and also prepare yourself for a journey where hearts don't fail, even when bullets do. The sun bled orange over the horizon, painting the sky like a bruise over the lonely plains. Elias Kane, a farmer worn out by years of solitude, stood in the shadow of the feedlot, the air thick with sweat and kerosene, and a silence that covered him like a damp cloth. Across from him, a girl, Clara, sat on the dirt floor of a shack, her wrists raw from iron shackles, her belly swollen from 8 months. Her mother, a woman with cracked lips and eyes as hard as flint, shifted in muddy boots, spitting words like venom. "She needs a husband, not some damn sawbone," she snarled, glaring at Elias. "A man like you should know the difference." Elias's voice, low and husky, interrupted, tired but firm. "I don't need a wife." His gaze swept past Clara, lost in the grain of the woodwork of the wall, chasing ghosts only he could see. "I need silence." No more words, just an exchange. 2 dull silver coins, a jug of whiskey, and the promise of half a steer slaughtered in the fall. Her mother unlocked the handcuffs as if she were throwing away spoiled grain, pushing Clara toward the door. "Don't give him any trouble," she murmured. "He paid you more than you're worth." Elias didn't touch her. He nodded to the horse, whose mane was slick with sweat, and Clara climbed on slowly, her eyes burning and her throat tight from holding back tears. The ride to her house was 3 miles, along dusty, shadowy trails lined with pine trees that whispered as if they were alive. Her house stood on the edge of nowhere. No neighbors, no fences, just wild land and a porch that hadn't heard laughter in a decade. Inside, the air was clean, too clean. No tobacco, no perfume, just wood smoke and lemon oil. A crooked photograph hung over the fireplace, a bright-eyed woman, her hands wrapped around a baby blanket, the child missing. "You can stay here," Elias said, pointing to a room on the left. "The bed is firm, the water is near the stove. I don't come in without knocking." Clara said nothing. Her fingers brushed the hem of her boot, where a thin blade was sewn in, a secret from days gone by. She nodded once, stepping inside. The room smelled of lavender and dust, the bed covered with a quilt too thin for this rustic place. A brush, a mirror, and unworn shoes were arranged beside the dresser, not a prison, but it felt like one. That night, coyotes sang to the stars. Clara lay awake, one hand on her belly, the baby kicking, the other clutching the hilt of her dagger. Her breath caught. She could hear no footsteps, only the wind and the creaking of old beams. After midnight, she tore off the quilt, the sharp small knife, and crept barefoot into the front room. No light, no sound, her heart drummed in her ears. On the porch the rain fell thin and cold, whispering. There was Elias, not in bed, not watching, but on his knees, the oil lamp dripping, tucking leather into a torn saddle. The rain soaked his shirt, dripped from his hair. He didn't see her, muttering softly to no one. She always said this place needed fixing. It meant more than the fence. Clara froze, the knife useless at her side. He looked up. "Couldn't sleep." She shook her head. He nodded, continuing to sew in the silence. Back in her room, she hid the blade under her pillow. Not trust, not yet, but something softer, something that hurt less than fear. Morning came, and bread and blackberry jam waited on the table. No note, no questions, just a silence that wasn't heavy, just still. The sun spilled through the lace curtains, golden shadows dancing on the bedspread. Clara sat, lavender mixed with cedar, soft rose and thyme. An unfinished embroidery frame lay on the windowsill, the thread trailing like a lost hope. A worn book of psalms sat beside it. A portrait hung at an angle. A woman, young like Clara, dark hair pinned back, eyes calm, waiting. Elias never came in. Every morning warm cornbread appeared on her doorstep, the kettle humming. Some days firewood was stacked neatly, a patched dress folded on the bed. He spoke little, only nodding when she passed. At night the house was quiet, the mantel clock ticking, the logs crackling to ash. Clara knew houses screaming, hunger roaming the floors, silence sharp as a blade. But this silence let her breathe. Was this man a savior or a jailer? Could the silence hide kindness or danger? The baby kicked, and Clara wondered, looking at the portrait of the woman waiting for her, if this ranch held more than ghosts. The days stretched into weeks, the sun rising higher, the air thick with the scent of sage and dry earth. Clara woke each morning to the same silent gifts, cornbread steaming by the door, the kettle humming, a bundle of firewood or a patched shawl left as offerings from a man who spoke in deeds, not words. Elias moved about the property like a shadow, steady and silent, his hands always busy, mending a gate, sharpening an axe, tending the horse with a care that seemed older than time. Clara watched him from the window, her belly heavier now, the baby shifting like a restless colt. She still wondered, was this a shelter or a cage? One afternoon, low clouds rolled over the valley, grey and heavy, promising rain. Clara was peeling carrots by the open window, her knife steady in her hand, when a loud knock shook the door. Elias opened it, and there stood a woman in a black hat, her boots caked with mud, and her jaw set like the butt of a rifle. "Martha," Elias said, her voice firm as stone. "I came for eggs," she said, her eyes sliding from him to Clara, sharp and cold. "And to see this girl you brought." Clara stepped back, her shawl slipping, the roundness of her belly clear as day. "Well," Martha hissed, hands on her hips, "isn't she ripe? She's barely grown and swollen like an autumn pumpkin. What's the matter, Elias? Is the town too quiet without a scandal?" Clara's fingers tightened around the knife, trembling. "She's your new pet?" Martha spat. "It didn't take long, did it, after you buried your wife? Now you've got yourself a barefoot slut from the apartments. I always liked them young." Elias didn't move. "Want some eggs?" he said, turning toward the kitchen and returning with a small basket. He held it out, saying nothing. Martha took it, her eyes burning into Clara. "She won't last, you know." "Trash never lasts." Elias said nothing, just put his hand on the door and closed it, softly, without knocking, the click loud in the silence. Clara stood there, her hand on her belly, the baby kicking hard. She waited for him to explain, to defend her, to tell her she wasn't what Martha claimed. But Elias simply went out onto the porch, sank into the worn rocking chair, and carved a piece of cedar, his eyes downcast. No anger, no words, just silence. That night Clara sat on the edge of her bed, brushing her hair, the mirror reflecting. The portrait of the woman, Elijah's wife, watching, still and silent. "He's more afraid of their words than he is of mine," Clara whispered to the frame, realizing he hadn't bought it to save her. He'd bought it because ghosts were easier than people, because silence couldn't judge him. The wind howled fiercely that night, rattling the shutters, slithering cold across the floorboards. Clara lay awake, her muscles tense, the blade in her boot a grim comfort. 2 weeks since her mother had sold her like cattle, and Elias had not touched her, had barely spoken, but the silence felt heavy now, like a noose waiting to tighten. She stood, the lamp off, dressed in the long coat he had hung on the peg, thick socks, shawl wrapped tightly. The blade pressed against her ankle, the price of freedom. She went out the back way, the cold stinging her face, the snow falling light and fast, piling up on the cracked path. Boots squeaked, teeth clenched against the bite. She did not know where, only away. Away from the silent man, the whispers, the ghost in that room. A stab of pain stopped her, sharp in her side. She gasped, clutching the railing. Another jolt, lower, harder. She doubled over, the snow stinging her knees as she fell. Her breath exploded in a haze. "No," she whispered, her palm on her stomach. "Not now, please." Footsteps, heavy, fast. "Clara!" Elias's voice harsh with urgency. She couldn't answer, the pain growing. His hands lifted her, strong, pressing her against the sodden wool coat. He carried her back, past the fire, to the padded bed. Kneeling, his face flushed with cold, he laid a calloused hand on her belly. "Don't let your child die because of what people say," he said, low, tense. His words rang like thunder, and in his eyes, Clara saw not the silent man, but someone who knew loss. The pain eased, her breathing steadied. Clara spoke, her eyes fixed on the fire. "She wanted me to serve drinks, pour whiskey, sit on her lap, smile like nothing mattered. The miners paid better if I was pretty." She clutched the quilt. I said no once. She locked me in the goat barn for 2 nights, then I stopped saying no." Elias stared into the flames, his shoulders tense. "I ran," Clara went on. "I washed sheets at a boarding house in Dry Creek. I knew him, the father, kind until he wasn't." She looked at Elias. "I don't even know if he knows. I don't know if I want him to know." Elias nodded slowly, then got up, put a log in the fireplace and let her sleep. But sleep eluded her. Half dreams of her mother's voice, whiskey, a man's breath haunting her night. What lay ahead, safety or sadness? Could this farmer's silence contain both? Clara drifted in and out of restless dreams, the smell of whiskey and the echo of her mother's harsh words fading into the night. A sound jolted her awake, a faint, heart-rending scream, a scream not from her belly, but from beyond the room. Heart-pounding, she rose, the floor cold beneath her feet, and followed the noise down the hall. Through the open door, moonlight shed a silvery glow on Elias, who sat near the front window. On his lap was a small, hand-sewn pink dress, delicate as a sigh, held like a memento too fragile to break. He didn't turn around, his voice soft. "She got it after the 3rd one," he said. She still believed it would be different next. "Time." Clara stepped closer, her whisper barely audible. "The 3rd what?" Her eyes remained on her dress, tracing the hem. "The 3rd loss. She lost 7. I buried each one behind the ridge. Boys, girls, we never gave them names." The air was filled with sadness, a pain that stretched on for years, beyond words. Clara understood then. Elijah was not insulated from the cruelty of the world, but because it had stolen everything he loved. She fell silent, the baby in her belly still, as if it too felt the weight. Morning dawned, the snow melting to reveal brittle grass. Clara watched from the kitchen window as Elias saddled the horse slowly and precisely, but something had changed. The shared sadness of the night before softened the silence between them. She wrapped her shawl around her and went outside, the air damp, the wind softer. She followed a narrow trail behind the barn, her boots crunching on the half-frozen ground, past the chicken coop and the broken fence. The trail wound through sparse pines, climbing a gentle rise where the sky widened. At the summit, she saw them, 7 markers, weathered, uneven, lined up like silent prayers. No names, just numbers, roughly carved into the weathered wood. She held her breath. She knelt by the last one, the seventh, the youngest earth, the struggling grass. A stunted wildflower lay against it, bent from the cold. Her fingers trembled, touching the wood. Warm, impossibly warm. Tears welled up, not from fear or shame, but from the weight of it all. She had mistaken his silence for threat, his pain for coldness. Elias was not the monster the village whispered about. He was a man who had buried 7 hopes. She wept for them, for him, for herself. Footsteps sounded. She turned. Elijah was standing at the edge of the woods, hat in hand, eyes unreadable. "I thought you killed her," Clara whispered hoarsely. "I know what they say," he said softly. Let her. Argui demands more breath than silence." His gaze drifted to the markers. Each one took a little more, from her and from me. By the 7th, there was nothing left. Clara stood, brushing against the wooden cross. She tried to plant. "Roses here," he said. "They never grew. The soil is too thin. The wind blows the petals away. Maybe this spring," Clara said softly. "We'll try again." His face twitched, disbelief, then a nod, as if he'd heard something he hadn't known he needed. They walked back, slow steps, side by side, the sacred mountain not like a church but like a revered ache. The days lengthened, the snow receded. Green shoots sprouted from the frozen earth. The sky turned pale blue, spring whispering nearby. The house moved too, softly, silently. Clara stopped waiting for Elias to leave before she went out herself. She joined him, pulling on gloves, holding nails as he mended the south fence, laying planks for the roof of the woodshed. Her belly was heavy, her limp was slight, but she moved with purpose. At noon, she cooked corn, boiled beans, rabbit he had caught. Sometimes he talked, mostly he listened. Every night, with the fire crackling, the sky gold to navy blue, Clara read from the worn Bible on the kitchen cabinet, its pages softened with use. She paused, her voice slow. "What does sorrow may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning mean?" Elias, carving a walnut spoon in the rocking chair, answered without looking. "It means that sometimes you have to lose something to know what is worth finding." Clara nodded, the words sinking in. Was this the joy seeping in, silent, stubborn, like green breaking through? Could a man and a woman, both scarred, find it together? Spring was approaching. The earth was peeling away its icy bark, stubborn, green shoots scratching the earth. The valley hummed with life. Birds sang, winds calmed, and the sky blossomed a pale blue, a promise of warmth. Clara moved more easily now, her hands busy, her heart less guarded. She and Elias worked side by side, healing the wounds of the property. She held nails while he hammered the fence, passed tools while he patched the barn, her belly heavy, but her spirit lighter. By noon, the kitchen was filled with the aroma of corn and rabbit stew, the steam rising like a silent prayer. Elias ate, nodded in thanks, and sometimes spoke a word, small but real. One afternoon, Clara stood on the porch, watching Elias tend a crooked row of wooden stakes along the fence. Dark, freshly turned earth held half-buried bulbs. "You're planting roses again," she said, coming closer. He looked up, wiping his hands on a cloth. "They don't take. They never have." Clara squatted slowly, her fingers pressing gently into the earth. "Then why keep trying?" Elias shrugged, his eyes distant. "Because she believed they would give. She said even the hardest soil will give if you're patient." He paused, then looked at her, steady and serious. "What about you?" Clara swallowed, a lump forming. "I never believed it," he said, "but I kept planting them. When she saw them, even the ones that didn't bloom, she smiled as if they had given way." Clara reached for a stake, carefully turning the dirt over a bulb. "I think she was right," she said softly. A flicker crossed Elias's face, surprise, then quiet hope. That night the wind whispered against the windows, the heat from the stove, enveloping the room like a quilt. Clara sat at the table, her hand on her belly, the baby kicking hard and rhythmic. "If it's a girl," she said, barely breathing, "I'll name her Rose." Elias looked up from the sculpture, meeting hers, steady. "She'll be stubborn," Clara added. "She'll grow where no one thinks she can, even if it takes time." He set the sculpture aside and nodded slowly, firmly. "It's a good name," he said, "and a better hope." Silence settled in, no longer a wall, but a shared space, like a field waiting for seeds. Clara slept soundly, no dreams of mining towns or her mother's fists or the sting of whiskey. Instead, sunlight danced through rose petals, small hands tugged at her braid, and Elias smiled, not just his mouth but his whole face, as a dirt-stained girl chased chickens through wildflowers. The roses bloomed, not perfect, not all at once, but enough. Morning came, and Clara woke to cornbread, the kettle singing, a patched apron beside her bed. She went outside, the air fresh, the earth stretching out all around her. Elias led the horse, his hands steady, his silence no longer cold. The days passed, the sun brighter, the valley alive. Clara read the Bible every night, her voice steady, asking Elijah questions about faith, about perseverance. He answered briefly and thoughtfully, carving wood in the rocking chair. One night, as the firelight flickered, she asked, "Why did you keep going after all you've lost?" He paused, his knife still. "I didn't want to, but the earth doesn't give up. The sun rises, the cattle must be fed. Keep moving or you won't live." Clara nodded, the baby kicking, a spark of life connecting them to this place. She began to see. The hope wasn't high. It wasn't quick. It was stubborn, like roses in thin soil, like a man who planted for a woman long gone. A neighbor came one day, a lame old man, hat in hand, carrying a pot of honey. "I've heard about you," he murmured, glancing quickly at Clara's belly. "I guess Elias isn't as bad as they say." He left quickly, clumsily, but the honey was on the table, sweet and golden. Clara didn't ask why he had come. She just poured tea, letting the silence reign. Was this the beginning of something? A crack in the wall of whispers? Could hope take root here, in this wild and broken land, for herself, for Elias, for the child to come? Spring was approaching, the valley thawing, green tendrils snaking through the cracked earth. The days were lengthening, sunlight warming the property, bringing life to the wild land. Clara moved purposefully, her hands steady as she churned butter, swept the porch, and stirred pots of beans and cornbread, the aromas mingling with the wood smoke. Elias worked beside her, quiet but sure, shoeing the horse, patching the shed, planting more rose bulbs along the fence. Their eyes met often now, not with words, but with a shared rhythm, a trust sprouting like stubborn buds in the soil. The baby kicked loudly, a reminder of the time approaching. One night the air grew hot and dry, a stillness that silenced even the coyotes. The sky turned purple, thunder rumbling low like a distant drum. Elijah stood on the porch, his eyes on the mountains, lightning flashing on the horizon, a sharp crack cutting through the night. Clara set the dishes on the table, the baby restless, when a waft of acrid smoke came through the window. Her nostrils flared, her heart pounding. Elijah burst in, his voice hoarse. "There's a fire!" "Up near Briar Ridge, the wind's blowing it here." He grabbed blankets and dipped them in a bucket. "Old stone cabin, North Trail, it's safe." Clara nodded, her pulse racing, reaching for her coat. A sharp pain pierced her spine, making her double over. "Elias," she gasped, clutching the table. He was beside her, his eyes wide. "It's time," she whispered, panic clawing at her throat. "The baby." The smoke thickened, the fire hungry. Elias didn't hesitate. He soaked 2 blankets, draped one over her shoulders, the other over his, and then lifted her, his strong arms cradling her belly. "Hold on tight," he said, kicking the door open. Outside, the world glowed orange, ash falling like snow, the wind howling, sparks flying. The trail to the cabin wound through a ravine, dry brush choking the path, flames licking at it. Elias moved fast, his boots pounding, his breath coming in short gasps. Clara screamed, a contraction racking her, a fierce pain. "I can't do it," she gasped, her face buried in his chest. "Yes, you can." He gritted his teeth. "Breathe, hold on to me." Smoke filled the trail, the heat biting, the trees cracking, bursting into flame. Clara clung to him, each step shaking, each breath tasting of ash. Her vision blurred, the pain and fear too. Then the cabin, ancient stone built into the hill, a rough cellar, a reminder of hope. Elias kicked open the door and laid her on the straw-covered floor, the walls cold and thick, the fire muffled by a distant roar. He acted quickly. He spread out the blankets, fetched water from a barrel, lit an oil lamp. Clara screamed. Another wave knocked her off her feet, her hands clutching his. "I'm scared," she whispered, her tears stinging. "So am I," Elias said, kneeling, his voice steady. "But you're not alone." Hours passed, pain upon a pain. Elias wiped her brow, whispered strength, held her hand through every groan. He had watched death take 7 children, but now he fought against it, for her, for this life. Sweat poured, smoke seeped through the cracks, the fire blazed. Outside, Clara's body shook, her breath coming in short gasps, but Elias remained, his calloused hand like an anchor. Was this the end, or a beginning? Could they survive the flames, bring life from this chaos? The stone hut withstood the roar of the fire, its thick walls muffling the crackle and howl of the flames outside. Smoke escaped through the cracks, thin and sharp, but the cold stone shielded them from the worst of it. Clara lay on the straw-covered floor, her blankets damp beneath her, pain sweeping through her like a storm across the plains. Her body doubled over, sweat breaking out on her forehead, her breath coming in short gasps. Elias knelt beside her, his calloused hand firm in hers, wiping her face with a damp cloth, his voice low and steady. "Breathe, Clara. You are strong. You can do it." She clutched at him, her nails digging deep, her eyes wide with fear and the firelight. The hours blurred, grief turning to pain, the world shrinking to the cabin, to the heat, to the pain. Elias stood, unwavering, whispering words of encouragement with every cry, every tremor. He had faced loss 7 times, buried hope in each one. But now he fought the fire, fought the past, fought for this life. The wind howled outside, sparks danced in the darkness, and Clara's screams echoed off the stone, harsh and fierce. Then a silence, brief, heavy, like the lull before thunder, a final push, a scream, sharp and undeniable, and then another, sharp, new, alive. A baby's. Cries filled the cabin, cutting through the roar of the fire. Clara gasped, her body shaking, tears streaming as Elijah cradled the small red bundle, wrapping it tightly in a cloth. He handed it to her, his voice a whisper. "A girl?" Clara laughed and cried at the same time, picking up the child, her arms shaking but sure. "Rose," she said, her lips brushing the baby's damp head. "She's Rose." Outside, the fire began to die, its fury fading. Inside, life blossomed, fragile and fierce. Dawn filtered through the cracks in the stone, soft and golden, carrying the scent of burning earth, a new hope. The baby's cry rang out, not faint but determined, a hymn of survival against all odds. Elias knelt, his hands stained with soot and blood, his shoulders shaking, not with fear but with relief. His chest heaved unevenly, as if he too had been reborn. Clara hugged Rose, her face pale, her exhaustion deep, but her eyes shining with wonder. The child writhed, slippery and newborn, blindly seeking warmth, milk. Clara looked up, tears in her eyes. "She's strong," she whispered, her voice breaking. "She's loud," Elias answered hoarsely, the shadow of a smile tugging at his lips, softening the lines of pain he had etched. He reached out, slow, hesitant, a trembling finger brushing Rose's cheek, soft, impossibly soft, like silk warmed by fire. She blinked, her eyes bleary from birth, and yawned, small and human, opening it. "Rose," he murmured, echoing Clara. "She will be Rose." Clara held her tighter, her lips in his hair. "You named her." "No," Elias said softly, his eyes meeting hers. "You did. I just believe it now." He slumped against the stone, soot streaking his face, his lips cracked, his eyes dull from the night's struggle. The smoke lingered, faint, a reminder of the battle won. Clara's heart stilled, Rose's warmth a lifeline. She looked to Elias, the man who had carried her through the fire, who had borne her through the pain. Was this the miracle, the life born in ruin, the trust forged in flames? The fire burned outside, its fury fading into memory. Inside, the three of them clung to each other, joined by breath, by a cry that named a child and awakened something new. Could this fragile bond hold, grow stronger like Rose, through ash and nature? Dawn light filtered through the cracks of the stone hut, golden and soft, mingling with the acrid scent of the burning earth. The fire had died away, its fury reduced to trails of smouldering smoke on the horizon, but its shadow clung to the air, to their skin. Inside, Clara held Rose, the baby's cries fierce and unrelenting, a testament to a life stubborn enough to flourish in ruins. Her tiny fists clenched for warmth, her breathing rhythmic against Clara's chest. Clara's face, pale with exhaustion, shone with silent wonder, the tears drying on her cheeks as she whispered to the child, "You're here, Rose. You made it." Elias knelt beside them, soot staining his hands, his shirt, his face grey with the weight of the night. His shoulders shook, not with fear, but with a relief so deep it shook him. His breathing was ragged, harsh, as if the fight against the flames had drained him to the bone. He looked at Rose, then at Clara, his eyes soft but dull, the weight of the night heavy in his gaze. Clara smiled weakly, her heart steady with her daughter's warmth, but then Elias stirred, leaning against the stone wall, and something changed. His face smeared with soot, his lips cracked, he went still, too still. "Elias," Clara said softly, the baby whimpering at her breast. No answer. "Elias!" An urgency ran down her spine, sharp and cold. She shifted Rose to one arm, reaching. For him! Her fingers closing around his forearm. It was limp, too limp. He fell sideways, crumpling to the stone floor like a loose puppet. "No, no, Elias!" she screamed, scrambling toward him, her knees scraping, her heart pounding loud, enough to drown out the world. "Look at me. Stay with me. Do you hear me?" He didn't move. She pressed her ear to his chest, her breath caught tightly, painfully. There, a faint, shallow beat, a whisper of life. "Please," she whispered, her forehead on his shoulder. "Don't go. Not now. Not when she's here." She shook him, once, twice, desperation clawing at her. Rose screamed, a high, angry wail, cutting through the air like a call to battle. Elias gasped, his chest rising and falling sharply. Another breath, harsh, sharp. His eyes fluttered, unfocused, and then found Clara's face. "She has lungs," he croaked, his voice barely a thread. Clara laughed, the sound turning into a sob. "You too," she said, relief flooding her, hot and wild. He smiled weakly, his eyelids drooping. "I think I'm going to need them." The three of them stood together, wrapped in silence, in breathing, in the fragile miracle of survival. The smoke cleared outside, the fire a fading memory, but inside the cabin something stronger took root. Clara cradled Rose, her small body warm and writhing, a promise of tomorrow. Elias leaned against the wall, his breathing steadying, his hand resting close to them, not touching but present. The night had forged them, bound not by blood but by a scream, a fight, a shared dawn. Clara looked at him, the man who had carried her through the fire, who had stayed for Rose. Would this bond be enough to rebuild, to face the wild days ahead? The morning grew brighter, the air fresher, the scent of burning pine fading. Clara rocked Rose, the baby's cries fading to whispers. Elias sat up slowly, shuddering, his strength slowly returning. "We have to go back," he said, his voice low and rough. "The fire is out, but the house, I have to see what's left." Clara nodded, her heart sinking, Rose in her arms. They rose, slowly, carefully, into a world of ash and hope. The trail back stretched silent, the ravine darkened, but the sky above was clear, blue, alive. Could they repair what the flames had taken, build a life from that fragile beginning? The morning sun was rising higher, casting a golden glow over a valley scarred by fire. The trail back from the stone cabin wound through a ravine of blackened brush and charred pines, ash covering the ground like icy snow. Clara cradled Rose, the baby's soft murmurs against her chest, her body warm and alive. Elias walked beside them, slowly, shivering with the weight of the night. His breathing more steady now, but his face still grey with soot and weariness. The air was heavy with the scent of burning wood, but a soft breeze whispered of spring, of life blossoming amid the ruin. They reached the property, and Clara's heart sank. The house stood, stubborn and charred, its walls streaked black, the porch sinking where the flames had come too close. The barn leaned, half collapsed, and the fence lay in splintered pieces. But the rose bulbs, half buried by the stakes, clung to the earth, unburned, defiant. Elias paused, his eyes scanning the damage, his jaw set. "We'll fix it," he said, his voice low and harsh. "This isn't the first time this land has been tested." Clara nodded, Rose stirring in her arms, and she felt a spark, hope, small but stubborn, like those bulbs. The days turned to work. Elias hammered boards, braced the barn, his hands steady despite his fatigue. Clara helped where she could, rocking Rose in a cloth sling, driving nails, sweeping ash from the porch. The baby cooed, her cloudy eyes blinking skyward, her fists clenched as if she were going to fight the world. At noon, Clara cooked. Baked beans, cornbread, whatever they salvaged, steam rising in the patched-up kitchen. Elias ate in silence, but his gaze stayed on Rose, smoothing the lines carved by grief. "She's strong," he said once, his voice hoarse. Clara smiled. "Like her name." The nights were silent, the fire crackling, the mantel clock ticking. Clara read from the Bible, her voice steady, Rose dozing on her lap. "Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted," she read, pausing. Elijah, carving a little horse out of cedar, looked up. "It means that the pain does not last forever," he said. "Something comes after." Clara nodded, the words sounding deep, a promise for them all. The silence between them became warm, shared, like a fireplace holding embers. A neighbor came in the early hours of the morning, a thin man in a weathered hat, carrying a bag of nails and a shy wave. "I thought you might need these," he murmured, his eyes darting to Rose and Clara. "I heard about the fire. I don't think you're what they say, Elias." He left quickly, but the nails remained, a silent gift. More came, a woman with jam, a boy with a bale of hay, awkward, hesitant, their whispers of scandal fading. Clara poured tea, set tin cups, set them aside. Elias worked on, nodding in thanks, saying little. The valley healed slowly. Green seeped into black, rain softened the ash, and rose bulbs sprouted, fragile, green, stubborn. One evening, Clara sat on the porch with Rose in her lap, watching Elias mend the fence. The sun had set, painting the sky amber. "She called you honey today," Clara said, smiling. Elias raised an eyebrow. "For Ma," she laughed. Twice I counted. He laughed softly, a soft, warm, familiar sound that touched her. She's smart. Clara's eyes softened. She's yours, she said, meaning more. Family, not just blood. Elias reached out and touched Rose's face gently. Wow, he said, his voice firm and heavy. Could this scarred land, this patched-up home, hold a future for 3 souls bound together by fire and struggle? Spring had come, the valley teeming with life, the wild grasses swaying in the wind, green covering the black scars of the fire. The homestead stood stronger now, the walls scrubbed clean of soot, the barn rebuilt, the fence firm and straight, wreathed in soft vines. The rose bushes near the porch were putting out tender shoots, delicate pink buds peeking out, not perfect but alive, stubborn against the thin soil. Clara moved easily, Rose slung over her hip, babbling, her tiny hands gripping a wooden spoon. Like a scepter, the baby's curls bounced, her bright eyes, no longer cloudy, watching the world with fierce wonder. Elias worked steadily, his hands smoothing cedar into a cradle by the front window, carving soft curves with the patience of a man mending more than wood. Clara stirred the stew, humming softly, the kitchen warm with the aroma of beans and cornbread. Laughter echoed now, Rose's laughter mingling with the crackling of the fire, the house no longer a tomb of silence. Letters arrived, tied with blue ribbon or tucked into baskets, cornbread, peach jam, a quilt, a child's scrawled note, sorry about what my mother said. Apologies, blessings from mouths once sharpened by contempt. Clara didn't ask why. She set out tin mugs, let the neighbors stay. The evenings turned golden, the porch a meeting place. A woman brought pie, clumsily, mumbling old stories. A man shared stories of cattle drives, looking shyly at Rose. Clara served tea. Elias nodded, his silence softening. One morning, Clara held Rose, pointing to the roses. "See, love, they're growing," she said, smiling. Rose stammered, "Mom, love." Elias laughed softly, brushing the dust off his hands. Twice again, Clara teased, his chest warm. He touched Rose's cheek, gently, then looked at Clara, his eyes steady. "Ours," he said, the word a bond, deep and secure. Days passed, the land healing. Clara walked across the ridge, Rose on her hip, the 7 markers still there, worn, but honored. She knelt, brushing the wildflower near the 7th, now joined by new flowers, small and brave. Elias followed her, hat in hand, silent. "They're watching her," Clara whispered, meaning the lost, the pain that had shaped him. He nodded, his eyes distant. "I think they'd like the sound of her." She smiled, tears welling up, not from pain, but from a shared lifting. They worked together, Clara holding boards, Elias hammering, Rose staggering nearby, chasing a butterfly, stumbling, getting up, undeterred. One evening the firelight danced, the Bible open on the table. Clara read, her voice soft. "He makes me lie down in green pastures." She paused. "What does that mean, Elijah?" He carved the arm of a doll, the rocking chair creaking. "It means there is rest after the storm, if you keep going." She nodded, Rose dozing in her lap, the words a promise. The silence was around them, warm, alive, like a field ready to bloom. Clara's hand rested on her belly, a slight movement there. New life, round again, a quiet hope. Elijah looked up, eyes soft, an unspoken question. She smiled faintly, a shared secret. Could this family, forged in fire, grow stronger, deeper in this wild land? The valley glowed in the summer sun, the land alive with green, the wild grasses waved high, the vines curled over the sturdy fence, and the rose bushes bloomed boldly, pink petals unfurling like stubborn blessings against all odds. The property hummed, the house scrubbed, the barn solid, the porch a haven of laughter and tin mugs. Clara stood by the fence, Rose staggering barefoot, her curls swinging, one chubby hand clutching a freshly picked rose. She squeaked, chasing a butterfly, stumbling and then rising undeterred, her laughter echoing like a bell across the plains. Clara's hand rested on her belly, round again, the awakening of new life, a silent promise. Elias was working nearby, mending a doll's injured arm with the same steady hands that had once sewn saddles. The crib by the window, smooth as cedar, could no longer support Rose's weight. She walked now, unsteady, bold, a force of her own. Inside, the kitchen was steaming with stew and cornbread and hope, Clara humming as Rose babbled, "Ma Bay!" from the floor, wielding her scepter spoon. The neighbors came often now, bringing pie and hay and socks, their awkwardness fading into stories and smiles. A child's note, scrawled and shy, lay on the table. "So glad you're here." The whispers of scandal were dust, washed away by spring rains and time. The nights painted the sky amber, the porch filled with voices. Clara poured tea. Elias nodded, their silence warm and open. One day they walked the ridge, Rose on Clara's. Hip the 7 markers standing sentinel, wildflowers blooming thickly, small, bold, a carpet of color. Clara knelt, touched the 7th, soft tears. "They see you, Rose," she whispered. Elias stood, hat in hand, eyes steady. "I think they are proud," he said softly. They turned, steps side by side, the sacred ridge, a place of pain, turned to peace. Night fell, the firelight dancing, the Bible open. Clara read, "And the light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not." She paused, Rose dozing, warm in her lap. "What is that, Elias?" He carved, the rocking chair creaking. "It means that the light wins, even when the darkness is heavy. It takes time, but it breaks through." Clara nodded, her hand on her belly, the new life pulsing, strong. Elias looked up, eyes soft, a smile, full, real, lighting his face as it hadn't in years. "Another coming," he said without a question. "Yes," Clara said, soft, sure. "Maybe a boy this time." The sun set, golden light spreading over the valley. Rose ran, petals trailing behind her, laughing in the twilight. Elias stood, beside Clara, his gentle hand on her back, a quiet strength. The once scorched earth bloomed green, not perfect, not easy, but alive. Clara whispered, "Some things are lost to make way for miracles. Even in the ashes, flowers bloom." Elias nodded, his touch a promise. "Ours," he said, meaning Rose, the new one, them, all of them. They watched Rose, their wild, headstrong girl, chase the light across the field, a family forged in fire, roots deep, ready for whatever the frontier brought. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel to follow each new story that comes out. See you next time.